What would you do? If one ordinary afternoon you looked into the eyes of four little girls on a street corner and saw your ex-wife staring back at you, a powerful CEO, a forgotten past, and a secret that changes everything. This is not just a story of business and betrayal. It's a journey of redemption, family, and the kind of love that money can never buy. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and if this kind of story touches your heart, please like, subscribe, and help us share these stories with more listeners just like you. The November wind curled its way between the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan, slipping past steel and glass like a memory long buried. On Fifth Avenue, where luxury storefronts gleamed beneath the pale winter sun, a black Lincoln Navigator rolled to a smooth stop at a red light. Inside, insulated from the honks and bustle of the city, sat a man who could afford silence. Parker Montgomery, 52 years old, chairman and CEO of Montgomery Enterprises, a name that echoed in boardrooms from Tokyo to Zurich. His Italian wool coat was pressed to perfection, his silver-threaded hair swept back neatly. To the outside world, he was the very definition of a man who had everything. Yet beneath the tailored exterior, something stirred. "Mr. Montgomery, shall I take the tunnel back to headquarters?" his driver asked, eyes catching his through the rearview mirror. Parker didn't answer right away. He loosened his tie, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and looked out at the familiar streets of a city he'd conquered, yet never truly lived in. "No," he said at last. "Drop me here. I need the air." "Sir? I'll walk. Just drop me here." The door clicked open and Parker stepped out, his polished shoes meeting pavement. The cold bit into his cheeks, but he didn't mind. For once, the numbness outside matched the quiet ache inside. It had been 10 years since he last walked these streets without an agenda, without a call in his ear, without a contract in hand. 10 years since his heart had felt anything beyond the high of acquisition and the dull echo of boardroom applause. 10 years since Victoria, he thought he'd buried her with the divorce papers, filed without farewell. She had cried that night, begging him to believe her, telling him the impossible had happened, that she was pregnant, that they had been wrong, but he had already made up his mind. The doctors had said he couldn't have children. Not now, not ever. So her tears in his eyes were just a betrayal wearing lipstick. His sister Eleanor had whispered cold logic into his ear. "She's lying. She wants the money. She wants the name. Don't let her ruin the legacy." And like a fool, he believed her. The light changed. Pedestrians surged forward. Parker moved with them, lost in thought. That was when he saw them. Four girls, no older than 9, huddled on the corner beneath a flickering street lamp. Their coats were mismatched, threadbare, too thin for the cold. Each held a small bucket filled with humble bouquets, and a cardboard sign read in careful, childish handwriting, "Flowers for Hope, $5. He might have walked right past them. Might have turned away like every other suited man with places to be and things to forget. But something stopped him cold. It was their faces. 4 identical faces. 4 sets of brilliant blue barn eyes, his eyes. The sharp, delicate cheekbones. The gentle curve of the jawline. The tilt of the head when curious. It was like seeing Victoria's features reflected in a mirror, multiplied 4 times. One of the girls looked up and met his gaze. For a moment, time unraveled. Parker couldn't breathe. The roar of the city dulled to a whisper. His phone buzzed, forgotten in his coat pocket. The merger, the meeting, the billions. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered but those eyes. The girl stepped forward, her hand holding a tiny bouquet of daisies and baby's breath. Her voice, sweet and high, had a strange, haunting familiarity. "Would you like to buy some flowers, sir? They're only $5. Parker opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He stared at her, at the girls behind her. Quadruplets, identical, each with the same eyes that had haunted his dreams, though he never understood why. Who are you?" he whispered. "I'm Emma," the girl replied, blinking up at him. "These are my sisters, Lily, Sophie, and Zoe. We're the Flower Girls." She smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. And Parker Montgomery, who had faced down CEOs, politicians, and billionaires, felt something break inside his chest. That night, the city's skyline blinked like a sleeping giant through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Parker's penthouse. He stood alone, still in his overcoat, a glass of untouched scotch in his hand. The air inside was warm, but his body felt frozen. His mind, however, was anything but still. He hadn't spoken a word since returning home. Every moment replayed in a slow, aching loop. The shy voice, the missing front tooth, the 4 pairs of eyes that mirrored his own. He kept seeing Emma's tiny hand holding out those daisies, as if she were offering more than just flowers. As if she were offering the key to something he didn't know he'd lost. He'd seen many strange things on New York sidewalks over the years. But never this. Never them. He moved through the darkened apartment until he reached the corner drawer of his home office, the one he hadn't opened in a decade. With slow hands, he pulled out a leather box. Inside lay a few yellowing photographs, a wedding ring, and a silk ribbon from a bouquet that had long since wilted. His fingers trembled as he picked up the photo on top, he and Victoria on their wedding day. Her green eyes sparkled with joy. His younger self, carefree, smiling, had no idea the man he'd become. He stared at her face, now framed by memory and remorse. He remembered her voice that last night, desperate, trembling. "It's a miracle, Parker. The doctors were wrong. These are our babies." And he, so sure of what the world had told him, had responded with cruel certainty. "I can't have children, Victoria. So you tell me, whose miracle are you carrying?" He had been cold, controlled, like always. Then the call came, from Eleanor, an urgent matter. Of course, Victoria had gone silent. Her tears stopped. Her mouth closed. "You always answer to her," she said softly. The next morning she was gone. No note, no trace, only the ring left behind. Parker sank into the chair beside his desk, holding that same ring in his palm like it might burn through his skin. Could he really have been wrong? Could she have been telling the truth all along? The girls, his daughters, were 9 years old, just as Victoria had said. 4 identical faces, not just similar. They were him. And yet, for 10 years, he'd lived as though they didn't exist. What had become of Victoria? Where had she gone after he banished her? Had she raised those girls alone? Were they hungry? Cold? Was Emma's missing tooth because she didn't see a dentist? He picked up his phone, hand shaking slightly. For the first time in years, he dialed Jenkins, head of security, a man who had found international hackers, buried assets, and secret affairs. But tonight, Parker wasn't calling to defend his company. He was calling to defend them. "I need you to find someone," he said, his voice gravelly. "Name? Victoria Bennett, my ex-wife." Jenkins paused. The name hadn't been spoken in years. "She disappeared 10 years ago, right?" "Yes, and I think she had children. 4 girls, find them. Find her." "Yes, sir, I'll start right away." Parker ended the call, then returned to the window. The glittering towers below sparkled like they always had. But tonight he saw something else. Something missing. He had built a kingdom of glass, steel, and silence. But somewhere in the city, his blood, his legacy, was selling flowers in the cold. He set down his glass. Tomorrow he would find them again. No more denial. No more delay. The next morning, Parker Montgomery stood beneath a faded green awning on Fifth Avenue, coffee growing cold in his gloved hands. He wore jeans for the first time in years. His custom suits would have made him too visible. A baseball cap shadowed his face. Nobody noticed the billionaire among them. Not even the doorman at the Plaza Hotel gave him a second glance. The city was already alive with its morning buzz. Delivery trucks unloading crates, doormen sweeping sidewalks, cab horns slicing the chilled air. Parker's eyes, however, were fixed on a single point across the street. He waited. Minutes turned into an hour, then another. His phone buzzed with calls. His assistant, the board, Eleanor. He ignored them all. At precisely 11:13 a.m., they appeared. 4 small figures pushing buckets on rickety wheels, bundled in mismatched coats that barely held back the wind. Like migrating birds returning to a familiar perch, they took their place on the same corner where he'd first seen them. Emma, the one with the quiet strength, directed the others. Sophie, alert and protective, scanned the area like a little soldier. Lily gently fluffed the petals of a bouquet, fixing them just so. And Zoe, the smallest, crouched beside the sidewalk chalkboard that read, Flowers for hope, $5 each. Underneath, drawn with careful precision, was a daisy. He wanted to rush over, to kneel, to speak, but something stopped him. Instead, he stood still, watching, learning. Within an hour, he saw how they moved, how they worked, how they shared a single sandwich between the four of them, bought from the corner deli with crumpled dollar bills. How Sophie cut her toast in half and gave it to Zoe without a word. How Lily tightened Emma's scarf. How not one of them complained. Then, the accident. A suited man rushed by and knocked over one of their flower buckets. Water splashed across the concrete, soaking half their inventory. The man never looked back. Zoe's lower lip trembled. Parker's body moved instinctively. But before he could cross the street, Sophie was already wrapping an arm around her sister's shoulders. Emma salvaged the fallen flowers with military precision. Lily dried off the stems using her sleeve. No crying, no pleading, just resilience. It shattered Parker more than any sob could have. By 2 p.m., the girls began to pack up, business done for the day. Parker followed. At a distance, carefully, respectfully. They walked through neighborhoods that grew more worn with each block, away from the polished glass towers, away from the heart of his world. Through Chelsea, then the Lower East Side. They stopped at a rundown brick building with a hand-painted sign barely clinging to rusted hinges. Hope Harbor, Women and Children's Shelter. Parker's breath caught. He remained across the street, hidden in the shadow of a boarded storefront. He watched as the girls entered through a side door. Moments later, a gray-haired woman opened the door and greeted them with hugs. Warm, familiar, full of love. They handed her something. He leaned forward, straining to see. Money. They were giving her their earnings. The woman nodded solemnly, pride in her expression, and wrapped her arms around them again before they disappeared inside. It was only then Parker remembered to breathe. So this was where his daughters lived. A battered shelter, a place most people crossed the street to avoid. And inside those walls was everything that should have been his family. His phone buzzed. Jenkins. He answered without looking. Sir, Jenkins said, voice low and professional. We found her, Victoria Bennett. Parker's hand gripped the phone tighter. Where is she? There was a pause. Rikers Island. She's serving a 6-month sentence, 4 months in. Parker staggered against the building. What? Why? Petty theft, shoplifting groceries, bread, peanut butter, canned soup. The judge gave her the maximum sentence, wanted to make an example. The world spun. Victoria, in prison, for food. While he, her husband, the father of those children, had been drinking $12 cappuccinos and signing billion-dollar contracts. I'll handle it, Parker said, voice strained. I want her out of there, whatever it takes. Yes, sir, I'll connect with your attorney. He ended the call, gaze returning to the shelter. So that's what had happened. The woman he'd thrown out with nothing had built a life, patched together with dignity, strength, and sacrifice. She had raised his daughters alone, had sold flowers to feed them, had stolen to keep them from starving. And he had built a castle in the sky and filled it with silence. A gust of wind tore down the block, lifting the scarf from around his neck. He didn't reach for it. The only thing he could hold on to now was them. The door to Hope Harbor creaked shut. But he wasn't leaving, not now. The front door creaked open as Parker Montgomery stepped over the threshold of Hope Harbor for the first time. The scent of bleach mingled with something faintly sweet, warm soup perhaps. A soft hum of voices echoed from down the hall. The walls were faded, cracked in places, patched in others. But everything was clean, cared for, like someone was doing their best with very little. He straightened the collar of his worn sweater. It had taken hours for Jenkins to set this up. No name, no past, just Mr. Parker, a man looking to volunteer. A voice called out from the narrow corridor. You the one here to help with dinner prep? It belonged to a gray-haired woman with wise eyes and deep lines around her mouth that spoke of years lived hard but not bitter. Yes, he answered. She looked him up and down, an expensive watch he forgot to remove, but also shoes with dirt on the soles, a shirt with soup stains from helping the girls yesterday. Name? Parker, he said. Just Parker. The woman gave a short nod. I'm Ruth Abernathy. I run things here. We don't get many male volunteers, and the ones who come usually don't last more than a day or two. Parker nodded. I'll do whatever you need. Good. Start by washing your hands. Then you're on vegetable chopping duty. And one rule, don't ask the kids questions they don't want to answer. Yes, ma'am. Also, she said, her voice softening slightly, if you're here for pity or penance, keep walking. But if you're here to help, come on in. He followed her down the narrow hall, past rooms crowded with bunk beds and shelves stacked with donated toys. The walls were adorned with children's crayon drawings, most of them simple, cheerful, hopeful. But his eyes landed on 4 particular drawings. Each showed a flower stand, a corner, and a man in the distance. They were signed Emma, Lily, Sophie, Zoe. Ruth noticed where he was looking. Those are the flower girls, she said with a hint of pride. They've been with us 3 months now. Hardest working little things you'll ever meet. Their mom, she did her best. She really did. Parker's throat tightened. What happened? She lost her jobs during the pandemic, trained as a florist, but nobody was hiring. Then came the eviction, then the shelter, and one day she got caught stealing food. Ruth turned to him. Victoria never touched alcohol, never brought a man here, never made excuses, just worked. And when the courts threw her in Rikers, those girls didn't cry. They asked what they could do to help her. Parker remained silent. Ruth looked at him curiously. You're awful interested in those girls, Mr. Parker. You know them? He hesitated. No, but I saw them selling flowers. And they reminded me of someone I once knew. Ruth studied him for a moment, but said nothing more. In the kitchen, Parker chopped carrots in silence, occasionally sneaking glances at the dining room where the girls helped set the tables. Emma moved with quiet command, placing spoons with military precision. Lily adjusted the placement of napkins, always 2 inches from the plate. Sophie followed close behind, checking the chairs. And Zoe sang softly under her breath, a tune Parker didn't recognize but felt like a lullaby. As dinner began, Parker helped serve. His hands shook slightly when he handed the tray to Emma. Thank you, Mr. Parker, she said, her tone cautious but polite. Sophie offered a curt nod. Lily smiled. Zoe just looked at him, long, hard, as if searching for something. And then, so softly he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, You look like the man in Mama's picture. He froze. But before he could respond, she skipped back to her seat. That night, as Parker walked home through the dusky streets, the weight of her words pressed heavy on his chest. He hadn't planned this, hadn't expected to feel so deeply, to ache so intensely. But it was no longer about guilt or curiosity. It was about love, unformed but growing, a father's love, and he would earn the right to feel it, no matter how long it took. The next Saturday morning dawned gray and chilly, the kind of weather that hinted at snow but never quite delivered. At precisely 6:45 a.m., Parker stood outside the shelter's back door with a wool scarf around his neck and a beat-up thermos of hot cocoa in his hand. He wasn't sure what compelled him to wake up early for this. Maybe it was Zoe's quiet whisper. Maybe it was the way Lily smoothed napkins as if order gave her comfort. Maybe it was guilt or love. Maybe it didn't matter. The door creaked open and Ruth appeared in a knitted cardigan. You're early. I brought hot chocolate. She gave a skeptical look. You trying to buy them off with sugar? No, Parker said. Just thought it might help. Ruth gave a small shrug. They'll be down in 10. You can help carry the buckets. Inside, he waited near the dining area, sipping from his own cup, steam curling around his face. The room was still dim, the only light coming from a small lamp in the faint glow of a hallway bulb. Then came the sound of 4 sets of footsteps, barefoot on linoleum. A moment later, 4 girls emerged, wrapped in hand-me-down coats too big for their frames, scarves hanging loose around their necks. Good morning, girls, Ruth said. Morning, they chorused sleepily. Then they saw Parker. Emma blinked. Sophie's brows knit together in suspicion. Lily looked at the thermos. And Zoe? Zoe smiled. You came, she said simply. I said I would. They didn't offer more words, but when he handed each one a small cup of cocoa, something shifted, just slightly. A crack in the wall. In the alley behind the shelter, the girls loaded their buckets onto a worn wagon, each bouquet wrapped in salvaged newspaper. The carnations had seen better days, but Lily added sprigs of evergreen and twine bows, transforming them into something quaint, hopeful. "You'll carry this one," Emma instructed, handing him the heaviest bucket. "Don't tip it." "Yes, ma'am," Sophie snorted. "We'll see how long he lasts." The walk to their corner was longer than he'd realized. Nearly 2 miles through streets still half asleep, past shuttered shops and steaming manholes. The girls kept close together, navigating cracks in the pavement, nodding to the familiar faces of early risers. Store clerks, sanitation workers, a crossing guard who waved as they passed. They were known, loved even, and they had built this world with their own small hands. At the corner of 5th and 53rd, they set up their modest stand. Emma pulled out the handmade sign, "Flowers for Hope." Does. Within minutes, they had arranged the bouquets, fixed their scarves, and adopted the personas of confident salesgirls. "Would you like some flowers, sir?" Lily asked an older man in a tweed coat. "For your wife, maybe," Zoe added with a grin that could melt snow. The man chuckled and handed over a $10 bill. "Keep the change." It continued like that for hours. Parker remained in the background, carrying extra buckets, straightening the sign when it flopped in the wind, offering hot hands when Zoe's fingers turned red. He didn't try to lead. He watched, learned. Each girl had her own rhythm. Emma was the anchor, firm, measured, practical. She kept the money, tracked sales, made decisions. Lily was the artist, crafting beauty out of almost nothing, her fingers quick and sure. Sophie was the sentinel, scanning for danger, challenging anyone who lingered too long or spoke too sharply. And Zoe was the soul. She made people stop, smile, remember. He had never been part of anything so beautiful. Around noon, traffic slowed, and the girls huddled under the awning of a coffee shop. Sophie pulled out a sandwich, cut into 4 pieces. One by one, they took their portion. "Where's yours?" Parker asked. Zoe smiled. "We share." He pulled out the extra sandwich he'd brought, wrapped in wax paper. "Then let me share too." They stared at it like it was a treasure. "Turkey and cheddar," he said. "No mustard. I wasn't sure." Sophie looked at Emma. Emma gave a nod. Zoe took the first bite, and something changed. Later that day, as they packed up their stand, Parker bent down to adjust a ribbon on one bouquet. Sophie handed him a daisy. "You can have this one," she said. "You were okay today." He held it like it was gold. That night, back in his penthouse, the flower sat in a crystal glass on his kitchen counter. The skyline outside glimmered, and for once he didn't care about mergers or reports. He cared about a sandwich shared under an awning, about a daisy from a girl who didn't trust easily, about laughter that lingered in the air long after they had gone home. He was learning, slowly, but he was learning. The snow came suddenly that week. Heavy, wet flakes blanketed Manhattan in silence, muting the usual chaos of the city. The flower stand had to be packed away early. Pedestrians were fewer, more hurried, less likely to stop for a small bouquet of carnations wilting beneath frost. Inside Hope Harbor, the girls sat curled up on a faded couch, their coats still damp, their cheeks pink from the cold. A fire crackled weakly in the corner, and Ruth had brought out an old, slightly frayed quilt. Parker entered the room carrying a steaming tray of hot cocoa, this time made from scratch, with melted chocolate and a hint of cinnamon. Zoe was the first to notice. "He made it again," she said, her tone a mix of glee and disbelief. Emma glanced up from her notebook, ever the accountant, tallying the day's meager sales. "We barely made $15. "It's the weather," Lily offered, already sipping her cocoa with gratitude. "People rush in the snow." Sophie didn't say anything. Her eyes stayed on Parker. He knew she was watching him more often lately, studying the way he listened, the way he moved, like she was adding up a puzzle with missing pieces. After a moment, she spoke. "You wear the same watch as that man in Mom's picture." The room fell still. Parker looked at her, surprised by the sudden statement. "What picture?" "In the special box," Sophie said. "We're not supposed to take it out, but Zoe wanted to see what Mom looked like in a wedding dress." Zoe's voice chimed in, soft but clear. "You look like the man in the picture, just older." Emma closed her notebook slowly. "It's not just the watch, it's your hands, your voice, the way your eyebrows scrunch when you're concentrating." "In your eyes," Lily whispered. The truth had been creeping toward them for weeks. Now it stood plainly between them. I think we know, Emma said at last. We just don't understand why you haven't said it. Parker sat down gently on the edge of the couch. The cocoa tray rested forgotten on the table. I was afraid, he admitted. Emma blinked. Of what? Of not being wanted. The girls exchanged glances. You didn't want us, Sophie said, not accusingly, just a child stating a painful truth. I didn't believe you existed, Parker whispered. That was my mistake. A terrible one. I had been told things that weren't true. I believed them instead of your mother. So why now? Lily asked. Why come looking? Parker looked around the room, at the threadbare rug, the books stacked beside the couch, the marks on the wall showing 4 sets of growing heights. Because I saw you, on that corner. 4 little girls selling flowers with courage in their eyes and dignity in their voices. You looked up at me and I knew. They were silent. Zoe crawled closer and sat beside him. Does Mom know you're here? He nodded. I visited her. She said I could tell you. Emma's eyes filled with something unreadable. Hope tangled with years of disappointment. So you're really our dad? Parker reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It was of Victoria, smiling in a hospital bed. 4 tiny babies swaddled in pink. On the back, written in faded ink. Emma, Lily, Sophie, Zoe, the Montgomery girls. Please tell their father they're waiting to meet him. I didn't see this until 2 weeks ago, he said. But I see you now, and I want to be in your lives. Lily leaned her head on Sophie's shoulder. Emma studied him. Are you going to stay? Parker didn't answer with words. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were 4 identical lockets, each engraved with a different name. One for each of you, a promise, not that I'll be perfect, but that I'll be here. Zoe opened hers and found a tiny picture inside, of her, grinning beside her sisters, taken just last week at the shelter. On the opposite side was a new photo, Parker in his flannel shirt, kneeling beside them at the flower stand. You already had this? She asked. I asked Ruth for a copy. Sophie, always guarded, fingered hers thoughtfully. Emma was the one to break the silence. You'll need to help with the Valentine's bouquets. It's our busiest time. A beat. Then Lily giggled. And we need someone tall to hang the new sign. Zoe just smiled and leaned her head on Parker's arm. That night, as snow piled against the shelter windows, Parker sat with his daughters, for the first time knowing they knew. There were no contracts, no negotiations, just warmth, trust, and the beginning of something long overdue. The penthouse was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that follows a bomb detonating, after the dust settles but before anyone dares to speak. Parker stood near the window, staring out at Manhattan's skyline, the glint of evening lights dancing off the glass towers like nothing had changed. But everything had. Behind him, Eleanor sat perched stiffly on the edge of the leather sofa. She wore her power like armor, black sheath dress, crimson lipstick, posture as sharp as the diamonds on her wrist. But Parker could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. You're making a mistake, she said at last, her voice like glass cracking beneath pressure. No, Parker replied, still facing the window. I made one 10 years ago. I'm fixing it now. Eleanor rose slowly. Those children are my daughters. Her lips tightened. You don't even have proof. Parker turned to face her fully. I do. He tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. It slid toward her like a challenge. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She already knew. And Victoria? Eleanor asked, voice steely. The woman who lied to you? She never lied, Parker said quietly. You did. Eleanor's composure finally cracked, just for a second. Her eyes narrowed. I protected you. No, you controlled me. You manipulated a doctor. You intercepted letters. You stole years from my children's lives. From me. They would have ruined you, she hissed. That woman, those girls, they're a scandal, a weakness. Do you have any idea how many knives I kept from your back in those early years? Parker shook his head in disbelief. You kept me from my family. I gave you an empire, she snapped. I didn't want an empire at that price. Eleanor took a slow, deliberate breath. You're being emotional, foolish. Your board already doubts you. The investors from Tokyo. Let them doubt he said, his voice iron. Let the whole world doubt. I don't care because this time I know what I'm fighting for. She laughed, bitter and sharp. And what will you be, Parker? Some suburban dad with play dates and soccer games while your company collapses? I'd rather be a present father than an absent billionaire. A tense silence stretched between them. Then she straightened, cold and composed once more. Then this is where we part ways. I think that happened a long time ago, he said. You just didn't notice. Eleanor reached for her purse and paused at the door. They'll resent you, you know, eventually. Children always do. Parker looked at her, eyes clear. Maybe, but I'd rather be there for the pain than not there at all. When she left, the air in the room shifted. The storm had broken, and Parker, once the man who ruled rooms and bent markets, now felt the most powerful he had ever been. He picked up his phone. Ruth, can you gather the girls in the common room? I have something I want to share. Outside, thunder rolled distantly across the sky, but inside, something much more powerful was building. Hope. The courtroom was smaller than Parker expected. For a man used to vast boardrooms, glass-walled negotiation suites, in conference tables the length of limousines, this modest chamber, with its dull wood paneling and rows of hardback pews, felt almost insultingly ordinary. But today, everything about this room mattered. Alexandra Hemsworth sat beside him, a legal titan dressed in the quiet armor of charcoal gray. Her folders were stacked with affidavits, timestamps, mail tracking data, the DNA report, and a mountain of evidence of misconduct, corruption, and something even darker, intent. Across the aisle, Judge Crawford, a man once thought to be unshakable in his convictions, sat behind the bench, face unreadable. And there, across from them both, stood Victoria. Her prison-issued uniform had been exchanged for a simple blouse and navy skirt, borrowed from Ruth's closet. Her hair was down again. She looked both older and younger at once, exhausted from months of survival, but glowing too because she could see the end of the tunnel. The girls weren't in the courtroom. Too risky, too painful. They waited outside with Ruth in a borrowed SUV parked just around the corner. But Parker could feel them there, his reason, his compass. Alexandra stood. Your Honor, we are here today not to dispute guilt. Ms. Bennett has admitted to taking food from a store during a moment of desperation. What we contest is the severity of the sentence, and more critically, the circumstances surrounding it. She moved with precision, presenting evidence like laying bricks for a foundation. Letters intercepted, paternity questions silenced by falsified diagnoses. Children left to suffer while the father remained unaware, manipulated by a third party with both motive and means. Parker glanced toward Judge Crawford, watching closely for any crack in that chiseled facade. Nothing. Yet. Then Alexandra played her hand. We submit evidence of financial transactions made to Judge Crawford's re-election campaign directly following private communication with Mrs. Eleanor Montgomery. A gasp echoed from the courtroom gallery. Judge Crawford shifted in his chair. In light of these findings, Alexandra said, we request not only the early release of Miss Bennett, but the immediate dismissal of all charges pending a full investigation into judicial bias. Victoria didn't look at Parker. She stared straight ahead, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Crawford finally leaned forward. Ms. Hemsworth, this is highly irregular. Justice often is, she replied calmly, but it's still justice. A long pause followed. The judge shuffled through papers, cleared his throat, glanced at the bailiff, and then, at last, looked Victoria in the eye. Mr. Bennett, I cannot undo the weeks you've spent behind bars, but I can correct what remains. He set the papers aside. You are free to go. All charges dismissed. The court offers its apologies. Victoria's shoulders dropped like chains had fallen from them. Behind Parker, someone sobbed softly. He turned. Ruth. Her hands clutched to her chest. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. As they stepped through the doors, Victoria stopped, her hand rising instinctively to shade her eyes. Then she saw them. 4 small figures in matching jackets, lined up on the sidewalk like a dream she'd barely allowed herself to believe in. Mom, Emma cried. The girls rushed forward, arms outstretched, faces radiant. Parker didn't follow. He stood by the door, watching her be swallowed in their embrace. 4 daughters wrapping themselves around the woman who had weathered every storm just to keep them together. His vision blurred. When Victoria finally looked up, tears streaked across her cheeks. She didn't speak. She just nodded. A silent promise. You did it. We did it. Parker nodded back. But in his heart, he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The boardroom of Montgomery Enterprises had never been so silent. 14 chairs, each occupied by a person whose net worth could eclipse small countries, surrounded a table of polished mahogany. The centerpiece, an etched Montgomery family crest, glimmered under the recessed lighting like a brand. For years, this room had been the crucible where billion-dollar decisions were forged. Now it felt like a courtroom. Parker Montgomery stood at the head of the table, not in his usual suit, but in a simple blazer over a navy turtleneck. No cufflinks, no tie. His posture straight, yet relaxed. The storm that once raged within him had been calmed by 4 small hands and one long overdue truth. Beside him, Alexandra Hemsworth clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up with the first slide, Redefining Legacy, a family-first corporate future. There was a collective shift in the room. Victoria's freedom had made headlines. The revelation of the Montgomery quadruplets had already begun leaking to the press. Investors were nervous, some angry, others curious. But everyone had come here expecting answers. Parker offered them. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice steady, we stand at a crossroads. Montgomery Enterprises has always been about prestige, innovation, and legacy. For years, I defined that legacy by numbers, earnings, acquisitions, expansions. He paused. But I've come to understand that legacy isn't measured in margins. It's measured in meaning. He clicked to the next slide, a photo of the girls, not posed or polished, just a snapshot of them laughing around a table, petals and stems strewn across it, constructing bouquets in a shelter kitchen. My daughters, he said softly. Emma, Lily, Sophie, Zoe. A murmur rippled through the room. Parker held up a manila folder. I have here legal confirmation of paternity. I also have sworn affidavits from 2 judges, multiple social workers, and my medical team. What I don't have, he added, is regret. Alexander stepped forward, launching into the logistics, the transition plan, the proposed restructure, the new philanthropic arm bearing Victoria's name, the Hope Harbor Initiative, a $50 million foundation designed to support shelters, family reunification, and mothers re-entering the workforce. This is madness, barked Edwin Cresswell, a Montgomery cousin and longtime board member. Turning a titan of industry into a charity fund, you're destroying our name. No, Parker said. I'm redefining it. He turned to the room. I know some of you won't support this. I know some of you will walk. That's your right. But as the majority shareholder, this is the direction we're taking. Silence, then a soft cough. Victoria Yin, a newer board member, spoke gently. And if the market punishes you for this? Parker smiled, the weight finally off his shoulders. Let it. Back in his office, hours later, Parker stood by the window. The skyline glittered like a promise. Behind him, the door opened. Victoria stepped in, dressed not for court, but for life, jeans, boots, a soft green sweater. Her hair hung loose again, catching the light like it used to. Well, she asked. They voted, he said. She raised an eyebrow. And? He turned to her, his face unreadable, then broke into a slow, genuine smile. Unanimous. Victoria blinked. Unanimous? Even Edwin. Alexandra brought up stockholder goodwill projections. Turns out empathy has value too. Victoria laughed, a short, surprise sound. It sounded like spring. Parker stepped closer. This isn't just about business anymore, he said. It's about what kind of man I want to be. And who is that? She asked softly. He looked toward the photo on his desk, 4 girls blowing out 10 candles. A father, he said, finally. The neighborhood was nothing like the penthouses of Fifth Avenue or the gated mansions of Westchester. No grand fountains, no private draperies, no butlers waiting by double mahogany doors. Just a quiet cul-de-sac in a tree-lined suburb of Westport, Connecticut. Mid-range homes with front porches and wind chimes. Driveways chalk-streaked with hopscotch drawings, and the sound of children laughing as they rode scooters down the sidewalk. It was, in a word, ordinary. And that was exactly what Victoria Bennett wanted. I thought you'd want something more. Montgomery, Parker said with a hint of amusement, standing beside her as the realtor handed over the keys. Victoria glanced up at him. This is more Montgomery than anything you've ever built, because it has them in it. She meant their daughters, of course. Four little girls currently running from room to room inside the white colonial-style house, arguing over who would get the bedroom with the window seat. It's cozy, Parker admitted, stepping over a rogue roller skate on the lawn. And I think Lily's already claimed the garage as her future flower studio. She asked for potting soil instead of a Barbie for her birthday, Victoria said with a smile. Can't argue with a budding entrepreneur. They stood for a moment in silence, watching as Emma opened a second-floor window and called down, Mom, I can see Mrs. Kelly's cat from here. Victoria called back, Don't fall out trying to pet it. The moment felt impossibly full. Simple, real. Parker turned to her. I had the architect draw up plans for a second phase. Maybe a greenhouse in the backyard, a sunroom, space for whatever comes next. Victoria studied him. For you, does next mean us? Parker didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object, a photo frame. Inside, a candid picture of the girls taken last week at Central Park. Victoria recognized it immediately. They were all wearing their mismatched scarves and mittens, cheeks flushed, mouths mid-laugh. But what caught her breath was who stood behind them. Parker, arms draped over their shoulders, eyes crinkled with joy. It looked like a family, because it was. I know I can't rewrite the last decade, he said, but I want to write the rest of the story, with you, with them, however you'll let me. Victoria took the frame, held it tightly. I don't need grand gestures, Parker, she said. I just need presence, consistency, a packed lunch, a bedtime story. His voice dropped. I can do that. She smiled. Good, because Zoe has already picked you to read the next 3 chapters of Charlotte's Web, and she's a brutal little critic if you skip pages. They laughed. It felt easy. Later that night, after the girls had finally collapsed in a tangle of limbs and blankets, Parker stood outside the house, gazing up at the stars. The porch light cast a soft halo across the lawn. From inside came the low hum of Victoria's lullaby, one she used to sing when she thought the babies were asleep, not knowing Parker would stand outside their old bedroom just to hear it. He closed his eyes. This was not the life he'd imagined. It was better, imperfect, unscripted, but rich with something his billions had never bought him. Belonging, a home, not measured in square footage, but in small socks on staircases and laughter echoing down the hall. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. Victoria stepped out, barefoot, her arms folded against the chill. They're out cold, she said. Even Sophie stopped fidgeting. Parker smiled. Do you remember that time we tried to assemble a crib at 2 a.m. and nearly divorced over the instruction manual? Victoria laughed. How could I forget? You tried to call the manufacturer's helpline at 3 in the morning. Desperation makes a man bold. They stood in silence again, side by side, shoulders just barely touching. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not slamming the door in my face. I thought about it, she teased. He laughed, then grew serious. Whatever comes next, I'm here. Not just for the birthday parties or the dad of the year moments, for the tantrums, the flu seasons, the college applications. She looked at him. Then let's build it. Not all at once, not perfectly, but together. And that was how it began. Not with a ceremony, not with a press release, but with quiet promises made on a front porch under starlight, in a house filled with laughter and healing, and the kind of love that, once broken, had chosen to be rebuilt. Brick by brick. Together, the storm rolled in without warning. Thick clouds gathered above Westport, casting the late afternoon in a premature twilight. The wind picked up, rattling porch chimes and rustling the last of the autumn leaves across the lawn. But inside the Montgomery Bennett home, the atmosphere was warm, alive with the clatter of dishes and the scent of roasted chicken. Sophie was at the table, laboring over a math worksheet while Parker chopped vegetables. Zoe perched on the kitchen stool, humming softly as she colored. Victoria stepped in from the hallway, holding a letter in her hand. Her expression stopped Parker cold. He put down the knife. What is it? Victoria walked over slowly, wordlessly handing him the envelope. It bore the elegant, looping script he recognized instantly. Eleanor. Parker's hand trembled slightly as he pulled the letter free. The paper was thick, perfumed, typical of Eleanor's theatrical flair. But the words within chilled him to the bone. To my dearest brother, it grieves me to witness the collapse of your once impeccable judgment. You have allowed sentiment and manipulation to undo decades of legacy. But not all is lost. The State Board of Guardianship has been alerted to concerns regarding the children's environment. I've spoken with members of the Oversight Committee. An investigation is imminent. Do what's right, Parker. Distance yourself from the circus you've joined, or be prepared to lose everything. With concern, Eleanor Victoria read Parker's expression. She's going after custody. He nodded grimly. She's weaponizing the system. And if she still has contacts inside Montgomery Enterprises, she could make it look legitimate. Victoria sat heavily on the kitchen stool, head in her hands. I can't lose them. Not again. Parker reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. You won't. 3 days later, the investigation began. A social worker arrived at the house, professional, pleasant, but clinical. She toured the girls' rooms, checked the locks on the windows, inspected the refrigerator, asked invasive questions in polite tones. Emma, always the mature one, tried her best to cooperate. But Sophie grew defensive. Zoe hid behind Victoria's legs. Lily refused to speak. Parker did his best to remain calm, to show transparency, but the tension in the air was suffocating. When the social worker finally left, promising a follow-up report in 7 days, Victoria collapsed into the couch. She's really trying to take them. Parker's jaw clenched. She's trying to scare us into giving up. That evening, Parker met with Alexandra Hemsworth in her downtown office. She's playing her last card, Alexandra said, reviewing the letter. If she's got someone inside the oversight board, they could push for a hearing, challenge your custody, paint Victoria as unfit based on her incarceration record. What can we do? Alexandra looked up. We fight back, not just defensively, offensively. She opened a file. You've kept records, right? Shelter donations, community work, medical records, school improvements? Parker nodded. And Victoria's new business, it's incorporated, it's growing. She's a contributing citizen again. Good, Alexandra said. We build a portfolio of stability, public support. We lean into transparency. She paused, studying him. But there's one more thing. What? We make it public. Parker frowned. You mean a press release, a media story? You come forward with the truth. The daughters you didn't know existed. The woman you wronged. Your transformation. We let the public see the human side, because once Eleanor sees that, she'll know she's lost. Parker hesitated. He had spent a lifetime guarding his privacy, his image, his reputation. But now, his daughters were more important than image. Do it, he said. 3 days later, the story broke. CEO Parker Montgomery reunites with quadruplet daughters after 9 years separation. The media exploded. Photos of Parker with the girls at Central Park, interviews with Victoria, quotes from Ruth Abernathy. The comments flooded in, some critical, but most supportive. My dad left too. This gives me hope. Second chances do exist. These girls are lucky to have 2 parents trying so hard. Even former clients of Victoria's flower business began sharing their testimonials. And slowly public opinion turned. Eleanor's silence was deafening. A week later, the custody board met. Eleanor, in a final attempt, had filed a formal request to intervene as concerned family, but she never showed. Her petition was denied. The girls stayed exactly where they belonged, at home. That night, Parker tucked Zoe into bed. She looked up at him, sleepy eyes wide. Are you going to leave now that it's over? Parker froze, then slowly shook his head. No, sweetheart, not now, not ever. She smiled, small fingers gripping his. Okay, good. He kissed her forehead. Outside the room, Victoria waited in the hallway. She still doubts, she whispered. I deserve that, Parker replied. Victoria nodded. But you're changing that. They walked back to the living room together where Lily's paper flowers decorated the mantel. The rain pattered gently against the windows. And the storm? It had passed. For good. The morning sun spilled over the green expanse of Central Park, gilding the tops of the cherry blossom trees with soft gold. A gentle breeze rustled the checkered banners strung between picnic tables. Laughter rang through the meadow as children darted between balloons and cupcake towers. It was the Montgomery quadruplet's 10th birthday, and it was perfect, not lavish, not extravagant, just full of the people who mattered. Victoria stood by the table arranging bouquets of daisies and peonies, each carefully assembled by the girls themselves. Her floral business had taken off in ways she never imagined, not because of publicity, but because people felt something real in her designs. Next to her, Parker was blowing up the last balloon, a stubborn silver one that kept slipping from his fingers. "You're going to pop a lung," she teased. He looked up, breathless but grinning. "Don't tempt me to fake it for sympathy. I already folded 70 napkins." They shared a glance that said more than words ever could. Not romantic, but a deep partnership. One rooted in survival, in redemption, in raising 4 little girls who had become their world. The guests trickled in. Ruth arrived first, carrying a gift wrapped in newspaper, her trademark. The children from Hope Harbor followed, then a few of Victoria's floral clients who had become like extended family. Even the new teachers from the girls' private school showed up, bearing handmade cards. And amid them all, the girls reigned like stars in the sky. Emma, ever composed, greeted guests with maturity beyond her years. Sophie organized the cupcake table, fiercely guarding the sprinkles. Lily darted from person to person, showing off the handmade paper garlands she'd crafted. And Zoe? Zoe stayed close to Parker. "Dad," she whispered, tugging on his sleeve, "can we do the dance now?" He looked down, confused. "What dance?" Zoe pointed to the small Bluetooth speaker nestled in the grass. "You promised you'd dance with us. You said if we made it to 10, you'd be brave enough." Parker laughed nervously. "I thought you'd forget." Zoe tilted her head, that signature Montgomery smirk spreading. "We remember everything." When the music started, a cheerful, clumsy mix of oldies and Taylor Swift, Parker did something he never imagined himself doing. He danced, not well, but with all his heart. And as his daughters danced beside him, 4 versions of his smile, his stubbornness, and their mother's strength, the crowd around them blurred. He saw only them. And in that moment, the past dissolved. The guilt, the regrets, the 10 years of absence. They didn't vanish, but they no longer ruled him. They had simply led him here. Later, as twilight fell and the candles on 4 cakes flickered, Victoria handed each daughter a small box. Inside each was a charm bracelet. On each bracelet, a single charm, a flower, a star, a book, and a piano key, each symbolizing their uniqueness. And between them all, a 5th charm, a tiny silver heart etched with one word: home. As the girls scrambled to compare bracelets and trade hugs, Parker sat beside Victoria under a maple tree. The wind had picked up slightly, scattering petals like confetti. "She asked me," Parker said quietly, "if I was staying." "And what did you tell her?" He looked at her, voice firm. "I told her forever." Victoria smiled softly. "No hesitation?" "None." A pause, then she leaned her head lightly on his shoulder. "We did it, you know. Somehow." He looked out over the field, where 4 little girls ran laughing, surrounded by people who loved them. "Yeah," he whispered, "we really did." The stars appeared one by one above the park, tiny candles against the dark sky, and beneath them a family, formed by chance, broken by pride, rebuilt by love, danced into the future. Together. For good. 6 months later, the Montgomery family was no longer just a name carved on skyscrapers. It was a family of 5. No, 6 if you counted Ruth, which everyone did. They lived in a brownstone tucked between 2 maple trees in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood. Not in Parker's penthouse. Not in a mansion behind gates, but in a home where every wall had fingerprints and every floor echoed with laughter. The kind of home Victoria always dreamed of. The kind Parker never knew he needed. The girls had adjusted quickly to their new school, each blossoming in their own way. Emma joined the debate team and was already class representative. Sophie made the soccer team and protected her friends as fiercely as she once protected her sisters. Lily had started designing greeting cards that Parker proudly displayed on his office wall. And Zoe had begun writing little poems, always ending them with, "And we all lived happily in our home." On a rainy October evening, Victoria found Parker sitting by the fireplace, a half-finished mug of tea cooling on the table. He was staring at a photo, the one Ruth had taken at their first family birthday picnic. He didn't hear Victoria approach. "You're doing that thing again," she said gently. "What thing?" "Staring at the past like it still owes you something." Parker smiled faintly. "I guess I'm just trying to believe I didn't dream it all." Victoria sat beside him, tucking her feet under a blanket. "This isn't a dream, Parker. It's a miracle, but it's also ours." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling softly. Then Parker spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For never poisoning the girls against me, for protecting their innocence, even when I didn't deserve it." Victoria's eyes softened. "I wasn't protecting you, Parker. I was protecting them. Children should never have to carry their parents' broken hearts." At that moment, Zoe wandered in, her arms full of sketchbooks and string. "Family time?" she asked hopefully. Parker and Victoria nodded. Zoe climbed up between them. "Can we do our favorite thing?" Parker chuckled. "What's that?" She opened a notebook, revealing 4 stick figures, each a sister, labeled with hearts. Above them was a 5th figure, a man with messy hair and a slightly crooked tie. Zoe had drawn a crown above his head. "Story night," she said. "You tell the story, and we fill in the ending." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "What's tonight's story?" Zoe beamed. "The one about the man who didn't know he had a family until 4 flower girls found him." Parker laughed, wrapping his arm around his daughter. "And what happens next?" he asked. Zoe looked up, smiling that familiar, mischievous Montgomery smile. "He stays. Forever." To those of you still listening, thank you. Maybe you too have a story of someone you lost and later found. Maybe you've carried regret, or you've waited years for an apology that never came. Maybe you've stood in the shoes of Victoria or Parker. Maybe you're one of the quiet heroes, like Ruth, who held everything together. Whatever your journey is, this story reminds us of one timeless truth. Family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up again and again and again. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't romantic. They're redemptive. They're hard-earned. And they begin on cold city corners where hope blooms in the hands of 4 little girls selling flowers to save their mother.